boys and girls. I'm going to start a book today with you called Rabbit Hill by Robert Lawson. This is one of my favorite novels that I've read. It's a good book to read for the spring because it talks about all kinds of animals that live on this hill. And the big problem is there has not been any neighbors around that have been growing good food for a long time. But the animals find out that there are new people moving into the house on the hill. So they're all excited about what these folks might be like. So we're going to be looking at the vocabulary from this novel, and I will be reading you hopefully all of the chapters from this book. So here we go. Chapter 1 is called New Folks Are Coming. And this is little Georgie. He's our main character. All the hill was boiling with excitement. On every side there rose a continual chattering and squeaking, whispering, and whistling as the animals discussed great news. Through it all could be heard again and again the words, "New folks coming." Little Georgie came tumbling down the rabbit burrow, panting out the tiding. "New folks coming," he shouted. "New folks coming, Mother, Father, new folks coming into the big house." Mother looked up from her very thin soup that she was stirring. "Well, it's high time there were new folks in the big house. High time. And I do hope they're planting folks, not shiftless like the last ones. 3 years now since there's been a good garden on this place. Never enough to put anything up for the winters. And last winter, the worst in years. I don't know how we ever got through it. And I don't know how we'll ever make it out if they're not planting folks. I just don't know. With food getting scarcer all the time and no place to get a vegetable except the fat man's at the crossroads and him and his dogs and all, and crossing the black road twice a day to get there. I just don't know. Mother was quite the worrier. "Now, my dear," said Father, "do try to adopt a more optimistic attitude. This news of Georgie's may promise the approach of more flirtatious and bountiful era. Perhaps it would be well if I were to indulge in a short stroll about the neighborhood and seek confirmation of this most auspicious rumor." Father was a Southern gentleman and always talked like that. Means he uses big words. As he picked his way through the long neglected garden, the big brick house loomed up dark and lonely in the twilight. It looked very gloomy. No lights in the windows, no folks about. The roof shingles were curled and rotting. Blinds hung crookedly. In the walks and driveway, tall, dry weeds rattled and scraped whenever a breeze stirred. Now that all the earth was stirring with spring, it seemed even more depressing. And here's a picture of the house. There had been a time, he remembered it wistfully, when things had been quite different here on the hill. The lawns then had been thick carpets of delicious grass, the fields heavy with clover. Garden vegetables had been plentiful. He and Mother and all their numerous offspring had lived well. All the little animals had lived well. There had been good folks there in those days. Children, too, who had played tag with them evenings, who had squealed with delight when Mother skunk, their little ones strung out behind them in solid Indian file, had paraded across the lawn. There had been a dog, a lady spaniel, old and fat, who carried on endless, noisy arguments with woodchucks, but had never been known to harm anyone. In fact, she had once found a lost fox cub and nursed it and raised it with her own puppies. Let's see, that cub would be Foxy's uncle, or was it his father? He couldn't remember. It seemed a long time ago. Then evil days had fallen upon the hill. The good folks had moved away, and their successors had been mean, shiftless, inconsiderate. Sumac, bayberry, and poison ivy had taken over the fields. The lawns had gone to crabgrass and weeds, and there was no garden. Last autumn they had gone, leaving the house empty with a desolate black windows and its shutters flapping through the winter storms. He passed the tool house where in the old days bags of seed and chicken feed had always rewarded the hungry field mice. It had been empty for years. Every grain of food had been searched out during the cold, hard winters. None of the animals ever went there anymore. Porky, the woodchuck, was on the side lawn, hungrily snatching at the straggly patches of grass. His fur looked moth-eaten and he was quite thin, a very different animal from the fat, waddling Porky who last fall had squeezed himself down his burrow to sleep away the winter. Now he was trying to make up for lost time. After each mouthful, he would raise his head, look all around, grumble, then snatch another mouthful. It made his grumbling come in short bursts. "Look at this lawn," he growled. "Just look at it. Not a leaf, not a clover in sight. Nothing but crabgrass and chickweed. Time new folks was coming. High time." He paused and sat up as Father courteously greeted him. "Good evening, Porky. Good evening. It is indeed a pleasure to see you about again. I trust you passed a comfortable winter and that this pleasant spring evening finds you in the best of health." "Don't know," grumbled Porky. "Health's all right, I guess, but I'm thin as all get out. And how in the tarnation is a fella going to put any fat on his ribs with this stuff?" He waved disgustedly at the weed-choked fields, the patchy lawn. "Them last folks were slops. That's what they were, slops. Never done nothing, never planted nothing, never took care of nothing. Let everything run down. Time there were some good riddance. I say, time there was some new folks coming, high time." "That is precisely the subject on which I wish to consult you," said Father. "I have heard certain talk concerning the possibility of new arrivals, and wondered if you had any definite knowledge of the facts of the case. Is there any clear proof of the most desirable addition to our neighborhood, or is it merely hearsay?" "Hearsay, hearsay," said Porky a little doubtfully. He scratched his ear and spat thoughtfully. "Well, now, I'll tell you, I hear say as how the real estate fellow was up to the house 2 or 3 days ago with a couple of people, going all around, inside and outside. I hear say as Bill Hickey, the carpenter fellow, was up here yesterday a-poking at the roof, and at the tool shed, and at the chicken house, and figuring figures on a bit of paper. I hear say as Louis Kernstall, the mason, was up here today, kicking and poking around them old stone walls, and them tumble-down steps, and figuring figures too. And I hear say this, and this is important." He hitched himself closer and banged the ground with his paw. "This is real important. I hear say as Tim McGrath, you know, the fella in the cottage down at the fork, does plowing and planting and such. I hear say he was up here this afternoon looking over the old garden and the lawn and the north field here, and he was figuring some figures too. Now, what do you think of that?" "I think," said Father, "that all sounds extremely auspicious. There seems no doubt that new folks are coming, and all signs seem to indicate that they are planting folks. We could do well with some planting folks hereabout. A nice field of bluegrass now. Father had come from Kentucky many years ago, and his talk of bluegrass had become just as trifling and tiresome. "'Twon't grow good here," Porky interrupted. "'Twon't grow good here in Connecticut at all. Myself, I could do with a good field of clover and some timothy, though I could do fine. Timothy and clover and maybe some decent lawn grass in a garden." His eyes grew watery at the thought. Some beet tops now, and maybe some green peas, and a mouthful of verbena to top off with. He suddenly went back to his frantic tearing at the sparse grass patches. Okay, boys and girls, I'm going to stop right here in chapter 1. And what I want you to think about is what Porky told Father. I want you to write down the evidence that he gave Father that new folks were coming. See you again in a little while.